Morning, Commissioner.
Hey, good morning, everybody. We'll just give it another minute as people are joining, and then we'll get this thing kicked off. Thanks. We can get started. So, good morning, everybody. My name is Ryan Whitehead. I am the Outreach Coordinator for CISA Region 1. I just wanted to welcome you all to the Vermont Telecommunications Security Webinar. Thank you all for taking the time to join us today. We're going to address some critical topics related to telecommunication security, sector vulnerabilities, and cybersecurity mitigations. So before we get started with the presentation, we're going to turn it over to our presenters for some opening remarks. We're going to turn it over to Mr. Carrick Johnson. He's the Commissioner of the Vermont Department of Public Services. Mr. Johnson, take it away.
Might be on mute there, sir. Eric, if you're speaking, you might be on mute. Can you hear him, Ryan?
I cannot. Yeah, I think, Carrick, I think you're on mute still. Maybe
There we go.
have some technical. Oh, there we go. Looks like you're off mute now. Cool, thanks.
So since I'm actually, I just got back from a meeting, so I was still at home. Would you like me to start? How's that?
Yes, please.
Yes, sir. Please go
Okay.
ahead.
Thank you, sir.
All right. Sorry about that. Well, certainly on a more of a cybersecurity technical basis, off to a roaring start. Sorry about that. Good morning. My name is Carrick Johnson. I'm Commissioner of the Vermont Department of Public Service, as you can see there on the screen. I'm really gratified and grateful to the team from the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency. As it's been described to me, they serve as America's cyber defense agency. What a Herculean task they have before them. And I'm really grateful that we're able to put on a program today. For those of you who are participating, I think you made a wise choice. Just a little bit of the only thing I'll mention about me, about my background, and I don't normally talk about this, as Hunter may know, and Dan Nelson, our guest from Velco, knows. But I served in the Air Force, and my job in the Air Force was to fly on an airplane and translate Russian. And the purpose was in translating Russian was to get a sense of the fighter aircraft and logistics and where the Soviet, at the time it was the Soviet Empire, where their weaponry was and how we could best ensure that we were keeping the Western Alliance safe. And there was a lot of lessons I learned about operations security, about cybersecurity, about all manner about threats and how they work, and both physical and personnel, as in communications. It's a serious business. So these folks we have here do very serious work, and I think the nature of that threat since way back when I was in the Air Force has really evolved, and it's pretty incredible. As I understand today, the purpose for this webinar is to increase all of y'all's knowledge about the common physical and cyber vulnerabilities in Vermont's telecommunication network, but also how to address them. Because it's one thing to get pretty wound up about the threats. It's another to learn more, to be provided more actionable information about strategies, how to fix that, means and methods you can take to avoid some of the missteps or protect yourself. Or, unfortunately, it seems like if in fact there is a breach, what you might be able to do. So I'm actually incredibly excited about this. As I understand it from our Director of Communications, Hunter Thompson, Gabriel Palazzi and Michael McCarthy were two of the folks we worked with the most closely in putting this program together. I think that's excellent. Thank you both. I'm also aware, as I mentioned previously, Dan Nelson, Vice President of Technology for Vermont Electric Power Company. In my judgment, Dan is one of the most knowledgeable and effective and best communicators, not just about threats again, but about the strategies and tools that can be used to defend against them. Lastly, I would say to Hunter Thompson, he's one of the best telecommunications, in my judgment, most knowledgeable telecommunications officials or people really in Vermont and maybe New England. So we're in really good hands. So I'm hopeful this is a fast moving, informative. I assume that we're looking to make this as interactive as possible with a lot of questions, and that we really get a lot out of this. And again, I just wanted to say to CISA, I'm grateful for your work. And with that, I'll turn it over to you, gentlemen. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. Now we'll go over to CISA Region 1 Regional Director, Matt McCann.
Well, good morning, all. Ryan, please make a note that I should never follow Commissioner Johnson again. That's a tough act to follow.
Duly noted, sir.
So thank you all for taking time out of your busy schedules today to join us for this webinar focused on benefiting Vermont's telecommunication resilience. It's great to see such a notable number of engaged communications professionals and stakeholders from across the state coming together to discuss critical topics that impact the security of our telecommunications sector. As was mentioned, today's agenda covers a range of important issues, from the latest cyber threats and vulnerabilities to physical security challenges, along with practical mitigations and resources that can help us collectively strengthen our defenses. These conversations are vital as we work together to address emerging threats and ensure the continued security of Vermont and the nation's critical infrastructure. Before we dive into discussions, I too want to take a moment to thank some folks who have made this event possible. First, I'll start with Commissioner Johnson for his partnership and leadership in these efforts. And he mentioned Hunter Thompson. I also want to specifically recognize Hunter for his exceptional work in developing this webinar. It's been made clear to me your contributions have been invaluable, Hunter, so thank you. Finally, I too want to express my gratitude to Velco Vice President Dan Nelson for his commitment to advancing telecom security in Vermont. And of course, I'd be remiss if I did not extend my deep appreciation to my applicable CISA colleagues for their ongoing efforts supporting such security initiatives. Thank you all. So I encourage everyone here today to proactively engage, ask questions, and share your perspectives as we work through the agenda topics. Ongoing collaborations such as today's webinar is key to addressing the security challenges we face to ensure Vermont's telecommunications sector remains resilient. Thanks again for being here today. I look forward to the discussions. Back to you, Ryan.
And while we're trying to get the link resent to Dan Nelson, boss, I'm sure you caught it when the commissioner correctly used the phrase operations security instead of operational security. That's how you tell a real operator. It drives the military folks crazy when operations and operational, the verb and the noun, get conflated there. So you know he's legit. And if you'll forgive me, we're trying to get Dan Nelson the link. Okay, great, excellent. Here we go.
Yeah, sorry about that. Got scrubbed from my email. It's a security feature, we could say.
That's good to have you, Dan. Go ahead.
Yeah. Well, thank you for the opportunity, and sorry for the delay. My name's Dan Nelson. I'm the Chief Technology Officer for Velco, Vermont Electric Power Company. I have 30 years experience in operating critical infrastructure in support of the power grid. Working for Velco, we're a transmission-only company. We don't do any generation or distribution. We provide essentially grid reliability, the backbone for the state of Vermont. for the distribution utilities. In order to provide a reliable power system, you have to have a reliable communications infrastructure. And today's grid is nothing like it was 30 years ago. It's more complex. Today, there are thousands of generating points, solar arrays and panels. This is a rapidly changing network. Power flows are changing more rapidly. Peaks are changing more rapidly. There's fewer rotating devices, more of an inverter-based network. So our grid is more requires more technology than it ever has in the past. So when we talk about that higher degree of intelligence, if you will, requires a more reliable communications network. Now, this network that we have in the power sector works best when it can be optimized, and we talk about optimizing it at the distribution level, where the distribution utilities are able to connect to customers or assets that they have. We think of smart meters, active management, load management, advanced distribution management systems. All of that is helping manage the thousands of devices that are out there. So all is dependent on communications, including the broadband, and securing carrier networks is an important part of critical infrastructure. So here we are with this opportunity with CISA, and they're here to help with a trusted partner. There's no cost involved, effective and very efficient use of their resources, and the resources they bring in, as was said, non-regulatory, non-compliance. No one here is turning you in for a mistake, but in fact to help. And when we engage, it's up to us and all of you to engage, and then in those situations we can avail ourselves to the opportunities that CISA brings to the table, along with all of its other partners. And furthermore, when we do that, others benefit as well by event correlation and sharing. So I think this is our opportunity. I think it's carriers' opportunities to ensure a highly secure communications environment, because it's an important part of the Vermont landscape overall. So with that, I'll say thank you for the opportunity for the remarks, and turn this back over.
Sure, and thank you to Carrick and Matt and Dan for getting us kicked off today. As you can see here, here's our agenda. First, we're going to hear from the Vermont Intelligence Center. Then we get a cyber briefing, and also we're going to hear from our cybersecurity advisor and our protective security advisor from CISA Region 1 that are out in the field in Vermont. They're going to talk about some vulnerabilities and mitigation strategies, and also from our emergency communications coordinator, Melissa Nazaro, and we'll go over some of the resources that CISA has available. So next up will be our Vermont Intelligence Center with a threat landscape briefing, and over to Ryan McLiberty. Thank you.
Great, thank you very much. For the folks in here who I have not met in person yet, I'm Ryan McLiberty. I'm the cyber analyst at the Vermont Intelligence Center. As was mentioned previously, I'll be giving a brief overview of the physical and cybersecurity threat landscape here in the state of Vermont, and also just providing a bit of information about the Vermont Intelligence Center and fusion centers more broadly for those that are not familiar with them. Go to the next slide, please. All right, so just a brief agenda here for this VIC portion of the briefing. We'll be going over the VIC functions, current threat environment, some recent sector-specific incidents, and I think we'll probably be holding off our questions till the end of the briefing overall, just in the interest of time, but I do have contact information for myself and my colleague Ken DeShane, who could not be here today. He's our counterterrorism and critical infrastructure analyst for those that are looking to get that information as well. So the Vermont Intelligence Center, for those that are not familiar, is the state's fusion center. and that makes us part of the National Fusion Center Association, or the National Fusion Center Network. The Fusion Center Network was set up after 9/11 to address issues in information sharing that were viewed as being a part of what led to the 9/11 attacks. Mainly, that was a lack of information sharing between local, state, federal, and even international law enforcement intelligence community partners. So the fusion centers are essentially supposed to be the information sharing hub within the law enforcement and intelligence communities within a given jurisdiction. For Vermont, the VIC covers the entire state of Vermont. There are some fusion centers that cover metropolitan areas. So in total, there are about 80 fusion centers throughout the country that are all sharing information with each other. So as I mentioned, the VIC's function is to share information on emerging threats and national trends within the state. As part of this, we host the If You See Something, Say Something tip line, where members of the public can report suspicious activity, potential terrorist activity, or other potential threats to public safety. We also manage listservs, distribution lists via email that cover both our law enforcement community here in the state as well as our critical infrastructure sectors. And through those distribution lists, we'll send out situational awareness bulletins. Those primarily go to law enforcement. And then we also have either one-off updates that will go to critical infrastructure, or we also have a quarterly report that's known as the Viper that goes out and covers threats to critical infrastructure, incidents that have occurred within the state, and things of that nature. Again, at the end here, I'll have contact information for myself and my colleague Ken. If anyone is not receiving information through those distribution lists, they can reach out to me directly and I'll make sure that they're added. The VIC also participates in outreach and education within the state, which helps us to get more suspicious activity reporting from the public, law enforcement, and critical infrastructure. And it also provides us a platform to give briefings, conduct trainings within the state focused around physical security, cybersecurity, and overall building the resiliency of the state and our infrastructure. We also work with our partners here at CISA, Gabe and Adam, in doing physical security assessments and cybersecurity assessments within the state, and also engaging in tabletop exercises, which are all geared towards improving the security posture of organizations within the state and building up those security programs. If we could go to the next slide. Thank you. So just to get into the current threat environment, I'll first be covering mainly physical security, which again, primarily would be coming from our analyst, Ken DeShane, for those that want to reach out to him directly for more information on these topics. So the bottom line up front is that currently the VIC is not aware of any known direct and implied threats towards critical infrastructure within the state of Vermont. It is a very specific statement, so I'd just like to provide some context to that, essentially just meaning that we are not aware of any groups or individuals who have specifically outlined plans to target infrastructure within the state of Vermont. That is not to say that there aren't groups or individuals who are planning for that, or who may opportunistically engage in that type of activity. It is just not a specific plan that we're aware of at this time. In terms of some of the
Yes. Sorry, I know we're not supposed to ask questions, but just quickly, just a clarifying question, I guess I would say. What is BLU? What is BLUF? What's that an acronym?
Yeah.
What's that stand for, please?
Bottom line up front.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. Sorry. Lots of acronyms and government jargon in here. So please do feel free to jump in if anyone does have any questions. So in terms of the most common tactics that we see utilized in Vermont on the physical security side, and this is specific to the targeting of our infrastructure, we'll usually see vandalism and sabotage or ballistic damage being used. The vandalism and sabotage, that's activity along the lines of someone breaking through a fence to gain access to a facility that they're not supposed to have access to. Maybe they will tag a building with extremist symbols or content, cut lines, or potentially steal items from that facility. And then ballistic damage is the use of firearms to cause damage to infrastructure. Usually this will be power lines, targeting substations, things of that nature. I'll get more in depth on the cybersecurity threats in a few slides here, but ransomware continues to be one of the tactics that we see most frequently utilized in the targeting of infrastructure in the state of Vermont. And foreign terrorist organizations, FTOs, and domestic violent extremist groups, DVEs, do continue to call for attacks on critical infrastructure in the United States. Within Vermont, we're most concerned about lone wolf actors, just individuals being radicalized by foreign terrorist organizations or domestic violent extremists and carrying out attacks within the state of Vermont. And this is kind of where the two-way street of information sharing really comes into play, both in terms of on our side at the VIC, keeping you all updated on what's going on both in the state, regionally, nationally, so that you can be aware of what to keep an eye out for, and then also have that reporting come back in terms of whenever you guys are seeing suspicious activity at your facilities, reporting that to either the VIC or CISA or FBI, your local law enforcement, whatever it may be. And the benefit to that is if your organization is seeing something that is suspicious, maybe you don't think it's worth reporting, but you report it anyways. We might also be getting reports on similar activity from other critical infrastructure entities within the state, or maybe from other fusion centers in our region or in the country. And we can kind of start taking that information and putting together a broader view of what's really going on, digging into that a little bit, and that provides us more information that is much more useful to then push back out to all of you to keep your facilities safe. Next slide, please. So in terms of sector incidents that are specific to communications within the state, as you can see up here, just within the last few years, between 2023 and 2025, there have been a handful of incidents within Vermont, mostly revolving around ballistic damage to fiber lines, or generally fiber lines being severed, tampered with in some way, and then also a breach and vandalism incident in 2023. And then regionally, there's been sort of continued reporting from New York regarding sabotage attempts or successful against 5G network infrastructure in their state. If we could go back to that slide, please. I think the next one. Yep, great. And you can see under the December 2023 incident, there's that note of the remoteness of the location in which that incident occurred, having an impact on the recovery time. That's something in general that we're very aware of, and I'm sure you are all aware of as well, just in terms of a lot of infrastructure in Vermont generally being in very remote, isolated areas of the state. And when there are incidents such as this, that remoteness can play a role in terms of getting someone out there to address the issue, respond to the incident, and so forth. Next slide, please. So getting into the cyber threat landscape in Vermont, up front, I'll say that most malicious cyber activity within the state is financially motivated. That is a pretty broad category, though, that can include ransomware attacks, targeting cryptocurrency, scams, fraud, things of that nature. Most of the activity we see here is on the sort of scam fraud side of things, but in terms of specifically the targeting of infrastructure in Vermont, The VIC isn't aware, at least recently, of any direct attacks disrupting telecommunications in Vermont. Again, pretty specific statement, not necessarily that there have not been incidents targeting telecommunications in the state or even breaches that have occurred that maybe didn't lead to disruptions of that infrastructure. But we have seen in Vermont issues related to other telecommunications breaches within the US, such as Chinese threat actors getting into several of the major US-based telecommunications companies that can either put the integrity of data specific to Vermont residents at risk, or even just the integrity of those communications in general when those threat actors are lingering in those networks in question. As I had mentioned a couple of slides ago, ransomware continues to kind of be the most frequent tactic utilized in targeting infrastructure in the state. Some of the more recent and frequent sectors that we've seen targeted include schools, healthcare, energy sector, government entities as well. And we've kind of seen a variety of different ransomware actors being active in the state. Some of them are the more legacy, prolific ransomware groups, such as Lockbit and AlphaV. Some of them are a bit more new on the scene, so to speak, and have kind of formed out of other ransomware organizations that were disrupted and splintered off into smaller groups. That would include 3AM ransomware, Fog ransomware. For those that are not familiar with these ransomware organizations, they all kind of fall into what we tend to think of as those Russia-based cybercrime ransomware gangs. But we see a variety of these different types of groups targeting infrastructure within the state. We also do see nation-state activity, both active here within Vermont and within the region in New England more broadly. And this is sort of the primary concern when it comes to targeting infrastructure within Vermont. Specifically when it comes to the telecommunications sector, China is really kind of the one leading a lot of those threats on the nation state side. And I know Adam is going to go more deeply in detail into those Chinese threat actors and some of their activity targeting this sector. Russia is definitely a concern too, in terms of telecommunications, and broadly China, Russia, Iran, North Korea. Those are kind of the main nation states that we're worried about in terms of targeting the state of Vermont or the United States more broadly across different infrastructure sectors. Nation states may be engaged in activity to include pre-positioning for future attacks. So this would involve embedding themselves in infrastructure networks and remaining dormant, increasing their access, so that if there were to be a conflict with the United States, for example, they could then exploit that access to cause disruptions. And then both nation states and other cyber threat actors may engage in data exfiltration, whether that's for financial gain, or it could just be nation state actors targeting intellectual property, trying to gather intelligence in that regard, and causing actual disruptions during these attacks. We've also seen nation state actors coordinating with non-state threat actors to target infrastructure in the US. So this would include financially motivated cyber threat actors, as well as non-state politically motivated actors, which are commonly referred to as hacktivists. And this essentially is kind of aligning the interests of those nation states and non-state actors in targeting infrastructure within the United States, and it provides those non-state actors with additional resources from nation states to assist in those attacks. Next slide, please. So getting into some of the tactics that we see frequently used within the state of Vermont to target infrastructure. And I will say this is primarily just from what we're seeing at the Vermont Intelligence Center. If you were to talk to CISA, the FBI, those different entities, they would probably have different visibility, seeing different tactics used. but we primarily see the use of phishing tactics being the primary driver of a lot of these cyber attacks. Increasingly, we see phishing kits being used to conduct phishing attacks, and these are essentially pre-made either guides or packages of malware that can be sold online to other cyber threat actors to help facilitate phishing attacks. Particularly, we commonly see phishing kits that are geared towards stealing Microsoft 365 session cookies. So this essentially can give threat actors access to their target's legitimate Microsoft 365 account. So that would include gaining access to their Outlook email, their Teams accounts, things of that nature. And that can be very valuable for threat actors because they can then use those legitimate email accounts or whatever else it may be to carry out further phishing attacks, this time using legitimate email addresses that might increase their likelihood of having a successful phishing attempt. And this is something that I do like to advise people about, just in terms of when you're kind of keeping on the lookout for what might be indicators of phishing emails within your inbox. Just receiving something from an organization you're familiar with or an individual you're familiar with does not necessarily mean that that email, or whether it's a text message or a Teams message, whatever it may be, doesn't mean that that isn't potentially malicious. We've seen within the state threat actors specifically targeting third-party organizations or vendors that an entity within the state works with on a frequent basis, and using legitimate email accounts from that third party to then send phishing emails to their end target. So just kind of keeping in mind that, if you're receiving emails from a person or an organization you're familiar with, but you're still seeing some of those red flags pop up in terms of maybe the way that they're addressing you in the email, the wording that they're using, trying to direct you to links or attachments that might seem a little suspicious, it's good to remain skeptical of those. We also see the use of valid credential theft, so targeting people's login credentials, selling them online, and then other cyber threat actors can come in and purchase those credentials to log into that person's account and initiate attack that way. Vulnerability exploitation. This is essentially cyber threat actors taking advantage of when people are not patching their software in a timely manner. And finally, publicly exposed devices, default passwords. I kind of classify this generally as a breakdown in sort of basic cyber security practices. So if you have devices that don't need to be exposed to the public-facing internet and they are left exposed, using passwords that are not sophisticated, are being reused, or the default password for a specific device or account, not using multi-factor authentication to protect different accounts, those can all increase the chances of having a successful cyber attack. And next slide, please. So this is the contact information for myself down at the bottom, and then my colleague I referenced earlier, Ken DeShane. For people who don't have our contact information, I would recommend taking a picture or writing it down somewhere so that you have that. And as I'd mentioned earlier, if you're not getting information from us through our distribution list, please feel free to reach out to me directly. I'd be happy to add anyone to those lists that would like to receive our information. If there are any questions right now, I'd be happy to take them.
I have one.
Yes.
Sorry, Ryan. A quick one. I held off, but I'm curious. I'm curious about any agentic AI. I mean, is it just too difficult now to be able to for a forum like this to be able to quickly encapsulate exactly what those threat vectors look like? Or what's your response to that, please?
Yeah, no, it's a great topic to bring up because it is certainly prevalent right now. So where we see AI being used the most frequently is actually a bit more in the kind of fraud scam environment where you can generate images of people, someone's voice, things of that nature to sort of trick your way into presenting yourself as someone that you are not. But it does come up definitely in other aspects of cyber attacks, cybersecurity in general, where you have threat actors who can automate a lot of tasks that previously would have been very time consuming. You can apply that to identifying passwords through huge databases that are used very frequently over and over again, and then potentially starting with those passwords if you're trying to just brute force your way into someone's account or a particular system. There are a lot of different applications for it in that sense. I think a lot of people hear about it in terms of if cyber threat actors are going to be able to, for example, write malicious code with AI. And I think some of that stuff is a bit less sophisticated in its capabilities right now. Not to say that it isn't being used in some circumstances, but I would say currently some of the primary threats related to AI in this space would be those spaces where we know AI is very effective right now in terms of automating those tasks, searching through a lot of information, developing phishing emails that might come across as much more legitimate than they previously would have, things of that nature, I would say.
Ryan, can you also drop your contact information into the chat so people can just cut and paste it right out of there? If they haven't already?
Definitely.
Great brief. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ryan. That was a great presentation. To continue the cyber threat discussion, we're going to go to our cybersecurity advisor in the state of Vermont, Adam Gamlin.
Thank you, Ryan. As Ryan mentioned, I'm Adam Gamlin. I am the cybersecurity advisor for Vermont. I sit in Colchester and cover the entire state. Work a lot with Ryan McLiverty over at the VIC. He is a great resource. I can't say enough good things about them. And if you end up working with me in the future, you will probably see Ryan tagging along to help me out with some of the assessments. So today, as they mentioned, we're going to do a quick sector overview here and speak a little more to the nation state threat actors that are targeting the telecommunications industry, then go into some common cybersecurity vulnerabilities, and then kind of match those up with what the nation state threat actors are doing and how we can, make steps to combat them. So starting with the sector overview, the telecommunications industry is part of the broader communications sector, which includes broadcast, cable, satellite, wireless, and wireline infrastructure. As a whole, is defined as one of the two uniquely critical sectors, the other being energy, as you can see highlighted up there. It is also one of the four critical lifeline sectors. And essentially, what this means is if the communications infrastructure goes down, there would be cascading effects across all the other sectors. Since most of the communications infrastructure is privately owned, close collaboration between government and private industry is necessary to really improve the security posture. Next slide, please. So since about 2016, or at least 2016, the People's Republic of China, who I will refer to as the PRC from here on out, if I remember, has represented a persistent cyber threat to U.S. telecom organizations. And as you can see here, the PRC is responsible for a vast majority of the publicly identified cyber intrusions into U.S. telecom and has maintained persistent access within our telecom infrastructure for almost a decade. However, the intrusions associated with Volt Typhoon and Salt Typhoon, starting in and around 2001 and gaining more attention within the last year or so, have amplified the attention that these threats to our communications infrastructure are receiving. As Ryan mentioned,
Okay, it's just us today. Celia's doing that. Sir Vermont, yes, I saw her on your television.
Ryan, do you mind muting everybody? Thank you. So as Ryan mentioned, the PRC threat actors are particularly unique in that they're more interested in pre-positioning against our critical infrastructure rather in conducting espionage rather than generating currency, say like Iran or North Korea, who are trying to evade sanctions. They also pop in and out of our systems instead of maintaining kind of persistent access and always lurking around, right? So they're harder to catch because they might pop in once a month to ensure that they're maintaining their backdoor and then pop out again. It's hard to identify them. Next slide, please. So the PRC's offensive cyber operations are broadly managed by 3 distinct entities, including the PRC's Ministry of State Security, which is roughly equivalent to the US's CIA, the People's Liberation Army, and the PRC's Ministry of Public Security, which is more or less their national police and domestic intelligence agency. So these 3 entities often co-opt the services of private PRC-based cybersecurity firms to engage in offensive cyber operations against foreign adversaries, US, Europe, Southeast Asia, etc. In an attempt to further obfuscate the involvement of the nation state itself. For example, Volt Typhoon, Brass Typhoon, who is also referred to as APT-41, Flax Typhoon, Salt Typhoon, APT-5, and Weaver Ant are all nation-state threat actors that have engaged in offensive cyber operations on behalf of the People's Republic and have targeted U.S. telecom companies. To showcase this, I'll hit a couple of examples here. Ryan, if you can just hit there we go. So in 2019, members of Brass Typhoon, who on this wanted poster here are APT-41, were indicted by a U.S. grand jury for their role in cyber attacks against, in part, U.S. telecom companies. The indictment identified these 5 individuals as employees of Shangdu 404, which is a PRC-based cybersecurity firm with publicly acknowledged ties to the Ministry of State Security. Next one, please. In January 2025, Flax Typhoon was identified as Integrity Technology Group, who is also a PRC-based cybersecurity firm associated with the MSS. And the last one, please. And then in 2025, the U.S. Treasury sanctioned another identified PRC-based cybersecurity firm affiliated with the MSS for engaging in the attacks that are more commonly referred to as kind of the Salt Typhoon intrusions. Next slide, please. So while there are many different PRC threat actors targeting the telecom industry, it is rather easy to get bogged down with attribution. So instead, I would ask you to instead focus on a subset of tactics, techniques, and procedures that are identified here that are commonly associated with these specific threat actors. So when you use MITRE ATT&CK to conduct an analysis of these 6 threat actors, you start to notice some commonalities that you may be able to leverage to strategically harden your defenses. For example, if we look at the initial access in the top left over there, these threat actors use 2 primary techniques, one exploiting public-facing applications, and then using valid accounts. So what can we do? The next few slides are going to be some common cybersecurity vulnerabilities that we can work through to help us counter these TTPs.
Hey, Adam, if I may, please just quickly. I just wonder about, in my experience, there's been for us listening to you, and thank you. Are there particular times of the year, particular political events when we should be even more on guard, or there's a higher volume of attacks, or is it steady throughout? Is there a season of, is there a typhoon season of more attacks? If you understand what I'm saying.
I think that they are going to be a persistent threat throughout the year. I do not believe there is any one time where they may be more active than another. However, if they are popping in and out of your systems during the workday in China, you will probably see, these threat actors, because they are people with a 9 to 5 job, popping into your system. So if it's between the hours of 9 to 5 in China, whatever that correlates to here, that's probably when you'll see them. That's probably when you'll see the activity in your system, right? They're not working at 1 a.m. usually. If that helps answer your question. All right, on to the common cybersecurity vulnerabilities, and at the end we'll tie this back to how this helps counter the PRC's TTPs. So the first one is failing to have an asset inventory in network topography. This is one of the most common deficiencies that I've seen while doing security assessments across the critical infrastructure space. And quite frankly, I get it. IT teams, cyber teams are busy. Documentation kind of gets pushed to the wayside. But I would encourage you to reevaluate these priorities and understand why exactly you need to dedicate some extra time to this documentation. And frankly, it comes down to this. If you don't know what's on your network, you don't know what devices are out there, you can't effectively apply controls to secure them. And if you can't effectively apply controls, a nation state threat actor who has virtually unlimited resources will find whatever you missed and work really hard to exploit it. So with that said, what should an asset inventory include? And first, it should cover both IT and OT, which is operational technology assets, and be sure to store it in an offline environment in case of a breach. If you are subject to a ransomware event and your asset inventory ends up being encrypted, you will no longer have an asset inventory. So onward, it should include the asset type. Oh, sorry, Ryan, if you can go back a little bit, my bad. Asset type, unique identifier, make, model, asset owner, software versions, vendor information, software bill of materials. That would be great. Get a lot of questions on the software bill of materials, and it's essentially a document that describes the components and dependencies that make up the software, packages, version numbers, licenses, scripts, etc. And having all this information in one place will make the change in patch management process much easier to manage moving forward. All right, next slide. So the second vulnerability that we'll discuss is insufficient change in patch management policies. And once you have your asset inventory and network topography down, it's much easier to instill an effective change in patch management plan. And what this is essentially are policies and procedures that provide you a structured way of evaluating vulnerable devices for patching and replacing. This is particularly important when countering the PRC threats targeting US Telecom. As both threat actors, Salt Typhoon and Volt Typhoon, have been known to exploit unpatched, publicly disclosed vulnerabilities in edge devices to gain that initial foothold in your network. So specifically for Salt Typhoon, they've been seen targeting Cisco edge devices, while Volt Typhoon has been seen targeting Fortinet devices. This does not mean they are the only devices that they are targeting. However, these appear to be the primary devices that they are exploiting to get that initial access. So for example, March 2025, just a couple months ago, open source reporting revealed that Volt Typhoon actually breached the Littleton, Massachusetts Light, Electric, and Water Department within days of the exploited vulnerability being disclosed publicly. So they are acting on these vulnerabilities quick. So it's important to stay up to date on what vulnerabilities affect your network and patching them, when possible.
Sorry,
then-
I just have to ask. I'm sorry,
Yep.
I just have to ask. Is that a particular profile you see where small utilities, that's been our experience, like the littler, they're looking for the weakest link in the chain and then kind of move up where there's connectivity. Is that fair? And they're trying to get money. Is it for money, operational, or both reasons when they're?
No, it has nothing to do with money and really nothing to do with your traditional intellectual, like property theft through espionage, right? Because I mean, a water utility or a utility is a utility, right? If you ask the company that made the Littleton, Mass utility to come over and replicate it in, said foreign country, you pay them enough money, they'll probably do it. It's to maintain persistent access. So if and when there is a conflict, like a possible conflict in the with Taiwan, right? They can cause enough chaos to distract us from responding effectively. Are they targeting small utilities rather than big utilities? I don't have any data points to point to yes or no. I would say I think they're exploiting anything where there is an opportunity for easy exploitation. Small utilities generally have no funding or little funding. They usually don't even have an IT guy, or IT person. Sorry, it's hard to have secure systems with no technical knowledge. And with the tools like Shodan, you can scan the internet, find operational technology or ICS devices exposed to the internet, and try their default passwords, which you can also find on the internet, and boom, you have access to said utility. So it's very easy for them to get in. I don't want to say it's very easy for us to prevent them from getting in, but there are things that we can do to hopefully make the threat actor move on to an easier target, because they don't need to spend an hour trying to get into a little water utility when they can go somewhere else and get in 5 minutes.
Thank you.
If that makes sense. Yeah. All right. Where was I? All right. Ryan, if you just hit the next button, I think a pop-up should come up. All right. So CISA has 2 free tools that can help you kind of with the vulnerability identification side of the house. Thanks, Kenrick. With the vulnerability side of the house. So it's going to be vulnerability scanning and web application scanning services. These are both persistent services. You give CISA your public-facing IP ranges that you want scanned, and they will scan them for you and send you a report. I think the report comes out weekly of the vulnerabilities in your external-facing devices. Then you can then go patch. Great resource. Highly recommend taking advantage of it. Plus, it's free, and you can't beat free. So, yep, thank you. Third common vulnerability is weak password policies. So, as I mentioned previously here, Salt Typhoon has been exploiting vulnerable Cisco Edge devices. These devices can store passwords in plain text or using deprecated hashing algorithms. However, Cisco devices that were made in 2013 and on have the option for what is called a Type 8 password, which is essentially a more secure hashing algorithm resistant to password cracking. So if you have a Cisco device, Edge device from 2013 or on, try to enable Type 8 passwords when possible. If the device is older than 2013, highly encourage you to upgrade it immediately, so you can get those Type 8 passwords enabled on that device. In addition to the passwords on Cisco devices, It's important to have a good pre-deployment policy that ensures you change your default passwords. Again, pre-deployment, not when they're already on the network. Change the password before you deploy the asset. Having passwords that are 15 or more characters. Using unique passwords for each system. If you change the default password on all your PLCs to something easy, well, if they crack the password on one, they're going to try that password on the other PLCs. If they can get in on the other PLCs, well, they just compromised pretty much your entire OT infrastructure. Yep, using unique passwords. Salt and hash your stored passwords. Don't leave them in plain text. Have a password reuse policy and a password blacklist. Password reuse policy, you can't use the previous 10 passwords that you used on the system. Password blacklist would be an example of this picture right here that I just pulled off Google, so I don't know how accurate it is. But regardless, these are pretty easy passwords to guess. Probably prevent your employees from using those. Have a lockout policy after a specific number of failed password attempts. This prevents brute forcing of user accounts. So threat actors can automate a script and try, 500,000 passwords in 3 minutes. So if you lock out after 3 attempts, that threat actor is not going to really be able to brute force your system. And then most importantly, using phishing resistant multi-factor authentication. And this would be, best practice would be to use like FIDO2 passkeys and or a Google Authenticator, Microsoft Authenticator app on your phone. If you can, try really hard to move away from the SMS and phone call option. Obviously, as you can see, our telecom infrastructure is continuously exposed to a Chinese threat actor at some point or another, or also vulnerable to SIM swapping. Next slide, please. All right, fourth common vulnerability is poor access control and account management. So what do I mean with this? Essentially, if system administrators are always logged in as a privileged user, this is bad practice. If your employees have access to everything within the network, this is also bad practice. You don't want your finance team to have access to HR data, and you don't want your HR team to have access to finance data. They probably don't need it to perform their job, so don't let them have access. To counter this, you can enforce the principle of least privilege, where employees really only get access to the things they need to perform their specific job. Other things to keep in mind is administrators should have separate user and privileged accounts. The privileged accounts should only be used for a limited period of time before they're automatically logged out. And you should only be using them when you're performing an action that requires privileged access. So installing updates, stuff like that, you really shouldn't be using your privileged account to read your Gmail. Disabling command prompt, PowerShell, and Windows management instrumentation for regular unprivileged users. You can do this through group policy. So it's pretty easy to do, and that'll prevent the threat actor from exploiting a regular user account and then being able to run customized scripts. Account access should be periodically reviewed for need. You can do this using role-based access controls. Thanks, Mike. And there should be a clear offboarding process when an employee leaves the organization. So accounts are no longer needed, are removed. And one thing I would mention with this, I would also think about what you are going to do if a employee with privileged access is terminated or leaves on bad terms. Why? Because that employee can do a ton of damage if they have privileged access in your system before they leave. So you may want to review logs to see what they have done to make sure they haven't dropped the back door into your network so they can get in after they leave and wreak havoc on your organization. Just something to keep in mind. Next slide, please. All right, so the last vulnerability is going to be no network segmentation. And this is particularly common in organizations with operational technology, where their IT networks are not separated from their OT networks. And really, in an unsegmented network, what this means is once a threat actor makes entry, there's nothing really precluding them from navigating throughout the rest of your network. There are no controls in place to prevent any lateral movement. If they compromise that initial access, it's going to be game on for them. However, within a segmented network, like you can see over here on the left, or on the right, sorry, you're making it much more difficult for them. So they breach that initial, they gain that initial access, but once they have that initial access, they can't really move very far because you put up, more locked doors to prevent them from moving. I tend to think of like a segmented network as like a house. So you have a house, you have your front door that's locked, and then within your house, you also have your bedroom doors. If you leave those open, it's unsegmented. If you close them, it's segmented, right? And only people with a key can get into that specific bedroom. Then within the bedroom, you have a closet. Within the closet, you have a safe. So thinking about it that way, kind of a defense in depth type of strategy. How can you go about segmenting? Multiple ways, a couple router access control lists, firewalls, demilitarized zones, VLANs are all great way to segment your network. Next slide, please. Okay, so if we conduct an asset inventory and have a network topography, we implement a change in patch management policy and procedure. We develop a robust password policy. We display strict account management and access controls and segment our network. We're going to be well on our way to combating many of the TTPs displayed by the PRC threat actors targeting your industry. So one thing to note, these are not, a be-all end-all list of what you should do. There are many other actions that you should and could take to secure your systems. However, these 5 common vulnerabilities are great low-hanging fruit that you can knock out to make it more difficult for them to get in and hopefully move on to an easier target. And next slide, and I'll turn it over to Gabe. And we'll do questions at the end.
Outstanding job, Adam. Very much appreciate it. I'm going to go ahead and assume everybody can hear me okay. I am your protective security advisor assigned to and embedded in Vermont. And I've been conducting physical security and convergence where cyber and IT, or cyber and physical security cross paths for more than 15 years now. And I've come to the conclusion that making a difference is a good gig. I'll get into a little bit more of that later. But our program in Vermont and across the nation really has been highly effective, highly impactful. And when we talk to the owner operators, those of you who run lifeline businesses like telecommunications and communications, water, wastewater, across the board, without exception, the folks who take advantage of our assessments, both on the physical and cyber side, and a whole suite of other CISA resources, ubiquitously give us the thumbs up and very much appreciate that we are a value add for their tax dollars. We're a free federal resource, again, with no connection to regulatory or compliance officials, rules, people who write the rules, and have anything to do with regulatory compliance. Don't get to see the information we produce for you. So we'll talk more about that later. But for now, let's go over some common physical security vulnerabilities. The header topic on this one is no control of the buildings or ground access. And what I mean by that is you likely have some control, but as you'll see in a future slide here, my mantra is the most consequential vulnerabilities are the ones you don't know you have. And generally, the vulnerabilities I've come across in Vermont or anywhere else in my career have been the ones where the owner operator of a facility thought they had well-established, well-executed, well-designed physical security, but there were gaps there. And that's really where Adam and I come in to identify those gaps, and our partners at the VIC as well. I'll use basic key control as the initial domain. As you see on the slides, establish a good key control system, consider prox cards. But let me stick with keys for a minute. I've been to facilities where I asked them if they have a proprietary keyway that was customized by a licensed, bonded, insured locksmith with a valid reputation. And believe it or not, there are some places who said, well, I go to Home Depot. I went to the folks there. I bought all my locks. We put them in. It saved money. It saved money, but that creates issues with physical security. That's likely not the case in most places. Most places in Vermont do have a proprietary keyway, but there are even gaps that can exist there. Does the keyway have a do not duplicate stamped on the bow of the key, so that if the key gets lost or stolen and the bad guy goes to try to make a copy, is he prevented from doing so? And it shouldn't be a common keyway. If you don't have a good key turn-in policy or a notification policy of a lost key, like, an employee must notify us if they have access to sensitive areas like a CO or a headquarters facility, must notify us within 2 hours or 4 hours, whatever the timeline might be, that they've lost a key that could garner access to a sensitive area. And oftentimes I don't even see a basic policy like that promulgated throughout an organization. The sooner you know that you have a missing priority key, the sooner you can call your locksmith, who's hopefully designed your key system with a removable core, so they can quickly and efficiently come out and replace the cores, rendering the missing key useless. That's how these vulnerabilities within the granularity start to exist. On fencing, I'll just say this: one of the most common vulnerabilities you see on fencing is, when we do these security assessments, we really will look at a fence if you have one. Not that a CO in a city area, downtown, really is going to have a fence around it. But what we look for in fencing is proper construction height, and does it really do its job? The most common vulnerability I see with fencing, there are a couple, but I'll stick with one in the interest of time, and it is neglecting to install a bottom rail on the lower portion of the chain link fence. And by bottom rail, I just mean it fuses or ties together all the lower mesh, so the adversary or the kids in the middle of the night who are drinking beer and just decide they want to break in somewhere can't pull up the bottom of the fence and traverse under it. And that's the issue I primarily see. Next slide. Okay, this is where the convergence issues come in. This is why Adam and I and Ryan at the VIC and Ken at the VIC work so closely together. But the human-machine interface, anywhere you have this on a SCADA system, OT system, very often the most common vulnerability is really unsecured programmable logic controllers, the human-machine interface for water system controller, SCADA, data racks, things like that. You really have to make sure, as simple as this sounds, that everything is password protected. I've been to a fair number of smaller, let's say more rural, I'm just going to say water facilities, sector facilities. And I've been in a number of buildings that are well-constructed, cinder blocks, steel doors, but they have no intrusion detection system. They have no video system. And I've been into many where they have a human-machine interface right inside the door next to the window. And that human-machine interface, which can be accessed and controlled through the keypad on the front of it, lacks a password, a unique password, or it still has the default password of quadruple zeros or quadruple nines. So the other thing with passwords also applies to keys and access control cards as well. You should have a finely tuned, well-practiced policy and procedure for either reporting lost or stolen or compromised passwords, keys, or access cards, and also a employee termination process where you work very closely with HR. Oftentimes that gets missed. The keys get taken home for an employee who stormed off under less than amicable circumstances, and many other, I would say, scenarios you kind of have to explore as case studies to see what policies and procedures you should implement to ensure you're not compromised after someone leaves or if someone breaks in. Next slide. Yeah. Intrusion detection systems, same with electronic access control systems, but one of the, trust me, there are many, but in the interest of time, I'm sticking to just a couple. A couple of issues I see here with intrusion detection systems out in the field is the employees know what the two panic buttons are on the front of the keypad. The alarm technician, your alarm vendor, has explained that if you press these two buttons, the lights and sirens will go off. Oftentimes in a CO or other places, they have a silent panic button. If you hit that, it calls the police quietly. But if a circumstance arises where someone, I don't know, by gunpoint, knife point, or otherwise forces you, surprises you outside and then tells you that they want you to disarm the system or you'll be harmed, you can use a duress code. And I'm surprised at how few people know the difference between the duress code and the panic code. But the duress code is simply your normal alarm disarm code, but maybe one digit higher or one digit lower. You get that programmed with your security contractor. And when you enter that password one digit higher or one digit lower, it will disarm the system, making the bad guy think it's disarmed and everything's fine. But it will also send a silent alarm to the central station, to the alarm central station, who will then notify law enforcement to come without lights and siren and that the person is under duress. So these are the kind of little vulnerabilities I look for. I saw a vulnerability not too long ago that fortunately the facility wasn't broken into, but in the attempt to save money, they installed passive infrared, the motion detectors inside, but didn't have any door or window coverage. They thought if somebody comes in, the motion detector is going to trip, and that's the way they saved money, which is generally fine. But what I noticed when I was there is they said, well, we have a motion detector in here, not a large facility. And I said, where is it? And it turns out it was behind some boxes that had been delivered. They had stacked boxes almost floor to ceiling, and it was blocking the view of the motion detector. So there's a vulnerability that isn't technological. It's more policy and procedure based because security awareness was not in the minds of those arming or disarming. Also, auto arming the system. A lot of features are built into technology you already have, you just may not know about. Door open too long alarms are easily programmed into your access control system, and oftentimes that's forgotten. People ask me all the time, how do I stop the teacher at a school from leaving the door propped open all day? It's driving us crazy. It's a real security risk. And I just say, have you ever heard of a DOTL? And it just stands for door open too long, and it's in your system, and you can program it in 10 seconds. Your electronic access control system can also serve as an intrusion detection alarm. So if you have an electronic access control system and there is a door that is not required to have an access reader on it, let's say it's an emergency exit door, you should still ensure that you have a door contact installed on there because they will program it for door forced open. And what that means is if that door is pried open or opened without using a card, it will send an alarm. And I'll jump right into your camera systems, which are one of my favorite. Camera systems really have three qualities. They boil down to, did it help solve a crime? And that is the forensic quality. Did it help prevent a crime? That's the deterrative quality. And did it help you see a crime in progress? So that means, is there a live view? Are you or law enforcement able to dial in through an app securely and view those pictures live. Are your folks who are in the CO late at night? I see COs all the time that don't have ground floor windows. If they're in there at night, do they have situational awareness of what's happening right outside the facility? So do you have an interior monitor, an interior display monitor, viewing a couple of the perimeter cameras so your employees can see inside what is happening? And the other vulnerability I see with CCTV or video surveillance systems, as they're called today, us old guys still refer to it as CCTV, is people say I have video coverage of my facility, but they have one camera on one corner of the building covering the front, and it's a wide angle view. It doesn't really give good facial qualities. You really should have fixed cameras, not pan tilt zooms by themselves, but fixed cameras with overlapping fields of view. And pan tilt zoom cameras are fine for surveillance or, at universities, panning over to see what is happening at a particular event. But the overlapping fixed cameras give you a 360-degree view of the building envelope itself. And you should ensure that I've been to many places, again, that will have a couple of cameras mounted on their building, and they say, we can tell everything that's going on at our building. But those cameras aren't looking at the building envelope itself, the physical structure of the building, so they really don't have awareness. The cameras rather are looking out at a parking lot. What I see out there is the most common vulnerabilities are not that facilities don't have intrusion detection, electronic access control, CCTV systems, lock and key control systems, segmented lock and key control systems. It's that they haven't thought it through and they leave it in place with gaps. And that's why I say the most consequential vulnerability are the vulnerabilities you don't know you have. One of the inside vulnerabilities, I will say, I'll just use an electrical substation control center, for example. I've been into many electrical substation control centers where they have both electricity generation, transmission, supply units, large cabinets with breakers, and they also use it to store their data feed through their server racks. But if somebody went rogue or somebody has nefarious intent, does an electrician who walks into and has access to a substation control center so they can work on the electricity portion, should they also be able to easily access your data racks, your server racks, or should they be in a locked cabinet, secured in a locked room? So there was just an incident. The reason I mentioned that, there was just an incident in Massachusetts. Again, I forget, Adam might bring us back in on what that was. Stoughton, yes, thank you. A disgruntled employee went in to a facility and damaged a great deal of their IT infrastructure through a single rack. Some of these options for consideration or recommendations that we'll give you are no cost, low cost, and they help mitigate the vulnerabilities we find. Others cost money, of course. And I'll just finish up with this. When someone in a leadership role who needs to speak security into a level of priority for an organization, when they tell me, well, that's expensive, my response is always, can you just qualify that and tell me it's expensive compared to what? So if it's a $5,800 to put an electronic access control system package on a door with a request to exit and an alarm contact on there, and maybe a motion detector backing that up, that's a good investment, actually, if you consider the damage that could be done if somebody could get in there and spend time in that facility, hacking into a system, putting a corrupt thumb drive somewhere, or just doing physical damage to a system. And I'm going to hold there until we get to you are not alone. We're going to help you resolve some of these things. So, and that's coming up later. And here's where leadership really comes in. Your organization should have a security plan, a continuity of operations plan, an emergency operations plan. It doesn't really matter if this is rolled up all into one plan. Many places I go to have it all in one plan. But if you have it in writing, you have a go by, it's codified there. And leadership are really the ones who are responsible for setting the tone that your security, your safety, and the security of your operations is critically important. They're responsible for understanding that if they overlook some of these vulnerabilities, it could do damage, not only financial damage, but reputational damage. That's where leadership really needs to set the tone for employees to be have a sense of security awareness. What do we got next, Ryan? Oh yeah, that's my favorite saying. The most consequential vulnerabilities are the ones the stakeholders, the facilities, the owner operators aren't aware of. And that's why I say you're not alone. You call, email. Our red tape is very heavy. You simply email me or you email Adam. We all get together with the VIC. You email the VIC, and you have us as a free federal resource coming out there in your community, and we have nothing to sell you. We're not trying to sell you anything, we try to make it educational as well. So we don't just come out and tell you what to do. If you don't understand physical security, I'll give you a quick primer on detection, delay, and visual assessment, the sort of three-legged bar stool of physical security. And there are others that go along with that, but it's not difficult to understand. And then we can start working together and collaborating on improving physical security, reducing risk overall for your facility. Thank you. This is what the VIC already talked about, sorry. So suspicious activity reporting is pretty specific in Vermont. You can either call the VIC directly, and Ryan, Mick, you can jump in if you need to, or your company's policy, maybe you call the local police department. All local police departments in Vermont know the VIC. You know, Vermont has 620,000 people. Everybody pretty much knows each other, but the local law enforcement understands that they will then collaborate with the VIC. So however that works, if you call the VIC's going to call back and bring your local police department in, or the feds if they need to, and vice versa. You can also scan this. It'll take you to our See Something, the government's famous See Something, Say Something campaign. Go ahead.
Escape. Next up is our emergency communications coordinator, Melissa Nazzaro.
Hello,
And
everybody can hear me okay? Is that a yes? Okay, awesome. Sorry, Ryan, I think you were just going to comment maybe on what you just put in the chat, that we're getting close to the end of our time. So I'm going to run through this quickly. My take on this is a little bit different than our previous presenters, because I'm going to really tie this into communications, but in a way that's different from what you might be. I'm going to try to tie what I do into what you do, right? So I'm the emergency communications coordinator for the region. So I'm not embedded within Vermont. I cover all 6 states within the region. And my primary area of coverage that I have within the 16 critical infrastructure sectors is actually emergency services sector, which is where the emergency communications group fits. So it's interesting that we kind of have this, competition here, right, between different types of communications. This communications sector, where you all are located, has evolved from being predominantly a provider of voice services into a diverse, competitive, and interconnected industry using terrestrial, satellite, wireless transmission systems. You all know this, right? Services are interconnected. And the providers depend on each other to carry and terminate traffic. Companies are routinely sharing facilities and technology that helps to ensure interoperability, but it also does mean that there's a bit of dependency between you all. Competitors are not. While the communications sector does have few significant dependencies, all the other critical infrastructure sectors are dependent on you. And so as such, this sector is one of the few that really affects everybody. At a minimum, we all depend on you. In emergency communications, we're looking at you all for infrastructure backhaul, but we're looking at, I'm primarily looking at land mobile radio, 911, public alerting and warning systems, right? So just to give you an idea. So just to briefly explain kind of how I look at the communications ecosystem as a whole, even beyond just the emergency communications, we've got this little quadrant here that I like to refer to. So we have the public to public communications. It's where we're facilitating information sharing that might be helpful in times of disaster. That's our upper left quadrant. That tends to be an area where you all are familiar with your role in that. The government to public is our ability to be able to actually get information out to the public from us. That's one of the areas that I primarily work in. The public to government is another one that I primarily work in, where where we're reporting information from the public up into our services, so 911 calls. And then government to government, how we're talking to each other. So whether it's land mobile radio or broadband or other ways that we're using technology to be able to communicate amongst ourselves, both local and federal, state government, right? That is, all of these are relying on backhaul that in most instances are coming through, are you, right? Okay, so next slide. So how does that, so what's the biggest translation for where the nexus is between emergency communications and communications in this area? So I want to talk a little bit about emergency support function 2. So ESF2 focuses on communications during emergencies and disasters. This is a co-led between CISA and FEMA. We've got one of our FEMA reps on the line right now too that I work with really, really closely during major disasters and events. But this is this opportunity is to coordinate with the various stakeholders, including government, private sector, and first responders, to provide some of the key functions of restoring communications infrastructure during a disaster, facilitating information flow between agencies, supporting communication efforts during response, managing resources. So this is an area where you all are going to be working directly with me and my FEMA partners in the event of a disaster. What we're trying to do with ESF2, which is the communications emergency support function, is to be able to provide lifeline reporting so we can identify communication needs, develop plans to address gaps that are reported by our stakeholders. And our goal is to restore and maintain communications infrastructure, which includes land mobile radio, 911 PSAPs, and the financial services as quickly as possible post-disaster. One of the other areas that where there's a connection that you may or may not be familiar with, and it's hard to ask, like, hey, does anybody know what DERS is? But I'll say, hey, does anybody know what DERS is? So the Disaster Information Reporting System, this is a FCC web-based system where telecom providers are mandated as of 2025. I believe it was January and effective for February of 2025, telecom providers are mandated to report infrastructure status during emergencies so that all outages can be monitored and recovery efforts can be coordinated effectively. Unfortunately, some of those reports end up being about up to 24 hours old by the time we're seeing them. So it doesn't take the place of good relationships and coordinations with your ESF2 team. So that's kind of the area where you might be being in contact with me or somebody else on the ESF2 team during a major disaster. Now, what can we do for you today? I wanted to kind of give that crossover, but what do we have today in terms of resources that CISA provides to you? So one of the main things that we have available is our Communications Information Sharing and Analysis Center, so our COMS ISAC. The COMS ISAC is designed to support the communications missions by facilitating voluntary collaboration and information sharing amongst its participants. So it's a voluntary group that you can join as an industry partner. We've got government partners on there as well. But this starts off with blue sky. So the idea is that we're able to have these conversations on a regular basis, develop these relationships, and share information during blue sky times, which then also can be helpful during major any sort of degradation in service or major incidents that are going on, or even minor incidents that are going on within the region. We share information on cyber and physical vulnerabilities, on threats, intrusions, anomalies between the communications industry, our federal, state, local, territorial governments, and other sources. The ComISAC will analyze reported data with the goal of averting or mitigating cyber or physical impacts on critical communication infrastructure, and then sharing that information with you. And we provide situational awareness through tracking of industry impact, reporting, and restoration trending when there are events occurring. So that is it's a voluntary group. I don't know if anybody on this call already is a member of that, but you are all available to join. You would just email the email address that's on the screen to be able to get that process started. And if you just want to go to the next slide. So this is just kind of look at all the members. Okay, you can go to the next slide. It's probably not even completely up to date. So the other service from my standpoint that I'm going to talk to you about, because there's more coming that Gabe and the rest of the CISA team will talk about, but just basically from my vantage point, is the priority telecommunication services. So I don't know how many people have heard of GETS and WPS. GETS is the Government Emergency Telecommunication Services. It's a free service for wireline prioritization for telephone calls. Authorized users can access the system using a PIN. You're all provided when you are a member, or when you request access to it, you're provided a unique PIN. It's a universal access number that you dial, you activate the PIN, and that allows you to go between landline, cell, fax, even satellite phones can use it as well. But it's some priority calling to most cell phones. It provides some to most cell phones as well as landline on the major carrier networks. Doesn't require any additional hardware. So we recommend that folks that are eligible, which you are, subscribe to GETS. And then also the probably more popular, because who's using landline phones anymore, is our WPS service. So that's the wireless priority service. So this provides priority calling for enrollees when they're using cellular networks and when those networks get congested. So people probably know about the FirstNet program. FirstNet is specific within the AT&T network. As soon as you leave the FirstNet network, that prioritization that you would normally have, it doesn't follow you into other networks. What WPS allows, it's kind of an enhancement. So if you are already using a FirstNet device, that's fine. But you want to actually engage WPS during those congested times if you need to, because you don't know that the phone number you're calling is necessarily a FirstNet phone also. So these are both free. We use a PTS dialer app now to make it even easier on your cell phone. You download it, you preload your PIN for GETS. You can actually, through the dialer app, open up your contacts and make a call right that way, so that you don't have to be manually dialing in all of the codes and information, which is what we used to have to do before the app was available. You still have to dial the codes and use the special phone number if you're calling from a landline. But like I said, since most people are using their cell phones anyway these days, the PTS dialer app is great. The last kind of the third leg of priority telecommunication services is TSP. So telecommunications service priority. So same words, just flip around. It's not free, but this is a circuit subscription that's paid by the system or circuit owner that prioritizes repair and even installation in some cases to damaged circuits. So this is it's not only to be used during emergencies. You can actually invoke your use of TSP when normal vendor service time don't meet an organization's need. But if you do find yourself with voice or data communication circuits that you want to be able to have listed as a higher priority because of the nature of the use, those can be added to this list, and there is a per circuit fee that you would end up having to pay in order to do that. So that's kind of the three-legged stool of priority telecommunication services that we provide. And then my last slide, PACE planning. So we have a PACE planning toolkit. The idea behind PACE planning is to identify your communications flow when you lose your ability to uh, access your normal day-to-day communication methodology. So PACE stands for primary, alternate, contingency, and emergency. The planning toolkit walks you through some information about these methodologies, about the workarounds and the flow between PACE all the way down through emergency, and then how you get back out of that. But just as an example that I like to use to make it funny, and because I think it's easy, but if you think about the idea of PACE planning for communications, it makes sense, right, in what we do, and it makes sense across all the industries, right, and all of our critical infrastructure sectors. But if you think about it from a personal standpoint, the analogy is for making dinner, right? So maybe your primary way of cooking dinner is using your electric range. Your alternate might be, because the electricity's out, you might have to go out and use your barbecue grill. If you have no propane and that barbecue grill isn't available to you, maybe you end up having to use a camp stove to be able to do it. And last case, you're cooking hot dogs over an open fire in your backyard. So it's this idea of how do we fall to maybe less used systems that aren't our normal everyday, which requires us to really think about and plan for that, and to communicate to others how they're going to be reaching us if our primary or alternate plan methodologies isn't available. These are they're and you will have access to different things than others, and so this toolkit kind of walks you through that process. So that's my spiel on the emergency communications coordination front. Thanks so much for letting me in on this comms webinar today. And if you have any questions, I don't know if my contact information is on here anywhere. I'm going to just stick it in the chat for you.
So thanks a lot, Melissa.
Good to go, Ryan?
Yes, sir.
Awesome. Thank you, Melissa. So I'm going to cover some, I know you heard the word free a lot today, but just to reiterate, everything that I do is free and available. One other thing to note that I forgot to mention earlier is we're not regulatory, or at least I'm not regulatory, and Gabe's not regulatory. So just keep that in mind. You don't have any, if we come in and something is not good to go, we're just going to help you get there. We're not reporting it to anybody. We're not going to fine you, nothing like that. So free cyber hygiene resources that we offer. We have vulnerability scanning and web application scanning, which I mentioned before. And that's essentially persistent scanning focused on your external facing infrastructure. So if you want to enroll in that, you can enroll in that anytime. You can email me, you can email our headquarters component, and they can get you set up. Essentially what you need to provide is a list of your public IP ranges, and then they'll send you a report. The next three services, I call them point-in-time services. They're not persistent. You sign up for them and work with our headquarters team to engage in them. First one is remote pen testing. Essentially, external pen testing, a phishing assessment, and they'll do some open source information gathering to see how they can find anything to exploit your systems. We have risk and vulnerability assessments, which are about 2-week engagements. First week is remote, second week is in person with our headquarters team again. And they'll come in, they'll do a pen test of your infrastructure, both internal and external, and they'll do a configuration review. Third one is a validated architecture and design review, or more commonly referred to as the VADR. And it's a review of your network architecture. They'll do a network traffic analysis and a log and configuration review and give you a deliverable with their findings. You can sign up for any of these. Again, just email me if you're interested. I can either give you more information or get you signed up. Next slide, please. Thank you. So cybersecurity assessments, these are done by me. And we use a tool called the Cybersecurity Evaluation Tool, which is actually an open source tool that you guys can download if you want to do this yourself. However, I recommend having a second set of eyes just because you might have some personal bias of your own environment. The tool contains 60 plus different assessments that you can do depending on what sort of framework you are trying to meet. I recommend starting with the cybersecurity performance goals, which is our kind of baseline assessment that aligns with the NIST cybersecurity framework. And it's a good way to help you identify and work to remediate some deficiencies within your cybersecurity posture. It also is really cool. It will kind of help you prioritize things based on, or prioritize the implementation of controls based on their cost and the complexity of implementing them, which can be really good if you are trying to explain to maybe your board or C-level management of kind of why they need to invest and why they should invest and how much it will cost to invest in these cybersecurity best practices. Next slide, please. CISA CISA tabletop exercises, and Gabe, feel free to chime in if you have anything. But we have CISA, we call them out of the box tabletop exercises, which you can get on our website. If you just Google CISA CTEP, it'll pop right up, or I can send them to you either way. And we have them specific for every sector. You can download them and tailor them as you wish and run through the tabletops yourself. If you wanted Gabe or I or both of us to come in and run through the out of the box tabletop with you, I'm more than happy to do that. If none of the out of the box tabletops really fit what you're looking for, please engage with Gabe and I, and we can maybe come up with some sort of customized tabletop to fit your scenario, and we can run through that with you as well. Next slide, please. CISA offers some industrial control systems online trainings that are absolutely fantastic. I've taken them myself, and they're great. If you, again, just Google CISA ICS trainings, they'll pop right up on our website. I can also, oh, look at that. They're even hyperlinked. And if you can't find them, you can email me and I will send them to you as well. Next slide, please. And I'll kick it over to Gabe.
Thanks, Adam. This is critically important, and I can do it in under 3 minutes. So we talked about the free federal resources. There's no quote involved. They are free. Your tax dollars already paid for them. But I won't get into details about the differences here, but let's just say the security assessment on first entry is a very flexible, efficient, and empowering tool where I will come out to your facility. We'll conduct maybe a 1 to 2 hour, 3 hours for a larger facility sometimes, walkthrough in collaboration. And since you have the practical, intimate, historical working knowledge of your facility, I'll ask you to give me a sense for what you think your vulnerabilities are, your pain points are in your security system. And as I walk around, I'll look at physical security from an integrated sense and where there might be some gaps. And I'll cover safe rooms for active shooters, public display monitors in lobbies if they're appropriate and what they do. And then across the gambit of the physical security domains. And I will compile that over a day or a couple of hours into a safe report. And it's very simple, very practical. You'll see in the report a list of the vulnerabilities we came across, and then what we call options for consideration. You will think of those as recommendations, but since we're with the federal government, I'm not even allowed to say the word recommendation out loud. Whoops, could be in trouble there. So your report will give you some practical options for consideration, and usually it's more than one. So you have some options. You may say, well, the first one won't work in our culture. The second one we can't really do for a while, but here's one that'll work in the interim, or short, mid, or long-term planning. And I will scope your facility and we'll have a discussion on which assessment is appropriate. But I'll leave it there for now. And And just to tell you that to get one of these, I'm going to stay on the line here a few minutes because I know we're over. In case you have Q&A questions for me, you simply again email me, email any one of us, and we'll make it so. That's all for me. Oh, I covered all the slides in my So we're way over. So there you go.
Great. Thanks a lot, Gabe.
Yep.
And thanks to all our presenters today for sharing their insights and expertise. I hope you found the discussions helpful. Apologize for going over a few minutes, but appreciate you guys hanging with us. If anybody has any questions, feel free to shout them out now or drop them in the chat, and we'll hang on. We'll hang on for a few minutes as long as you guys have questions.
I'll also just say that if you need to reach me, Melissa, you can always reach out to Gabe. He knows how to send information to me if necessary. So.
Yes, we can make these slides available. I'll be sending them out after the meeting at some point. All right. Well. One-page summary. Yeah, I think we should have a lot of good information on the CISA.gov website. Actually, that'll list all that. But if there's no other questions, or we appreciate you guys joining us today. Thank you for being a part of the conversation around Vermont telecommunication security. We look forward to continuing these discussions down the road. Take care. Have a great day and have a great long Memorial Day weekend. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.